The headline reads, "Pursuing Deontay Wilder is not an attempt to cash out on Tyson Fury," insists promoter Frank Warren. Now, Warren has been doing a lot of interviews lately after this news that Tyson Fury is potentially taking on Deontay Wilder later on this year. Warren's been doing a lot of interviews, and in the interviews, he's been saying that he has seen the contract that Shelly Finkel has, which was, given to Team Joshua. And he's talking about it was basically 80 million because it's 2 fights. So it was 80 or 90 million or whatever it was. So he is basically, this is what I'm going to call it. This is what I'm going to call it in my opinion. This is a smear campaign by Frank Warren. That's my opinion, okay? You don't have to agree. I'm saying, but this is, in my opinion, a smear campaign by Frank Warren on Anthony Joshua and Eddie Hearn. You have to understand Frank Warren's history. Frank Warren in the past, over many years, has proven himself to be a very, very bitter man. On countless occasions when fighters have left him, Frank Warren has turned from being their biggest fan in his column that he writes in the mainstream press. He has a boxing column. He's turned from being their biggest fan to their harshest critic literally overnight. Countless situations where that's happened with Frank Warren, where the guy signed to him, he's fighting for Warren, Warren's singing his praises, and literally next week when the guy leaves Warren, Warren is just slagging him off. That's what he does. And it's also the same when Frank Warren wants to sign somebody very badly, particularly when it's some kind of big name. He wants to sign them badly and they don't sign with him. Then he goes from praising them to slagging them off. He did that with Audley Harrison. Now you can laugh at Audley Harrison all you want, but when Audley Harrison won the Olympics, Frank Warren was desperate to sign Audley Harrison. He was singing Audley Harrison's praises. He was on TV saying, "I'd love to be a part of Audley Harrison's journey." As soon as Harrison did the deal with the BBC, Frank Warren started slagging Audley off, and he was obsessively slagging Audley off for years after that. Same with David Haye. He wanted to sign David Haye at one point in David Haye's career, and that didn't happen. Frank Warren became very bitter towards David Haye. And there have been countless fighters, as I say, who Frank Warren has parted company with, and Warren wasn't happy about it, like Joe Calzaghe, like Ricky Hatton, and it all got very bitter. Seemingly, as an outsider looking in, down to because of Frank Warren. So he's a very bitter character, and here now we see with Anthony Joshua, he was very careful not to criticize Joshua over the past couple of years, ever since Joshua turned pro actually. He's been very careful not to criticize Joshua too much because he felt like he still had an opportunity to sign him. And even in the past year, when Joshua hadn't renewed his contract with Matchroom, Frank Warren was very, very careful not to criticize Anthony Joshua. But now that Joshua has signed this 3-year extension with Matchroom, now Frank Warren comes out and he's being far more critical of Anthony Joshua already. Yeah? How predictable. If you know Frank Warren's behavior and how he's been before in the past over many years, you know this is perfectly predictable. It's to be expected from Frank Warren. Now he's trying to make out that Joshua's a coward and, he's seen this contract and this, that, and the other. Look, I don't trust none of these boxing promoters, and I certainly don't trust Frank Warren. I know Frank Warren's history very well, okay? Better than a lot of boxing fans who may be watching this right now. And I know his history very well, okay? And that's not to say he hasn't put on some great cards over the years. Frank Warren was the man back in the 90s in terms of the cards he put on. One of the greatest fights I've ever seen, maybe the greatest fight I've ever watched live, was put on by Frank Warren, and that was Nigel Benn versus Gerald McClellan. That was actually, I think, was it co-promoted by Don King? I think it was. Back then, King and Warren were business partners. So, he's put on great shows back in the 90s, but the character of the man is bitter, petty, and a control freak. This is a man who wants to be in control all the time of of everything around him and everything in boxing. And when he can't be, yeah, he gets very bitter and angry. That's been my observation anyway of him over the past few decades. So this is just more of the same, really, from Frank Warren. And he's teamed up with Tyson Fury, who is a man equally as bitter as he is. Because Warren is bitter and envious of Eddie Hearn. And Fury is bitter and envious of Anthony Joshua. So you got two bitter, envious people together. It's a match made in heaven. But at the same time, you've got other players like Deontay Wilder, who is just an emotional, irrational hillbilly. That's what Deontay Wilder is. And then you've got Shelly Finkel, Anthony Joshua, and Eddie Hearn. I'm going to put those three in the same category. Finkel, Joshua, and Hearn are all very greedy people. So those are the three categories. You got the bitter category, which is Fury and Warren. You got Wilder in the category all of his on his own, kind of like an uneducated hillbilly. And then you've got the greedy category, where you've got Hearn, Joshua, and Finkel. Yeah, that's what I would say is really going on from my perspective. As an outsider looking in, I have no inside knowledge of any of these situations I'm talking about. I'm just an outsider looking in, reporting on what I've observed over the years in the case of Frank Warren and over the past few months with the rest of the guys. So, yeah, Warren says this is not a cash-out fight, Fury against Wilder. And I don't think it is a cash-out fight. I believe him when he says that, right? Because I'm looking at all the circumstances surrounding it as well as what Frank Warren is saying. Tyson Fury's been looking very good. I'm going to do a separate video on Tyson Fury's training because he's been looking fantastic in training. Very sharp, fast, movement incredible, particularly for a guy of that size. So yeah, I'll be doing a separate video on that. I'm really impressed with how Tyson Fury's looking in his training at the moment. Now, obviously, training doesn't necessarily translate to the ring. You can look great on the pads. It don't mean you're going to look great in a fight, but it's certainly promising. I've never seen a fighter come back from being so severely overweight and having the drink and drug problems and, you know, alcohol, drink and drug, alcohol, the depression and stuff like that. I've never seen a fighter come back from all those issues and get back to his best. I've never seen it before. If Tyson Fury manages to do it, as far as I'm concerned, he's treading new ground. He's breaking uncharted territory. And for that, you really have to give Tyson Fury massive credit, you know, if he's able to get back to his best, given what he's been through. So the signs are looking promising at the moment, and I hope Tyson Fury does get back to his best. And because he's looking so good in training, I don't think Frank Warren is trying to cash him out. Now, it is weird how Tyson Fury don't want to fight Bellew and don't want to fight Joshua, because he's been on record, even in the last few days, saying that he don't think the Joshua fight will happen ever between him and Joshua. And the reason he gives is because he says Joshua and Hearn are not fair, which is what I said, you know, a few seconds ago or a few minutes ago. They're greedy, basically, Joshua and Hearn. Let's be real. They're greedy men. And Fury's saying, you know, I don't want to deal with these greedy men. But at the same time, is Tyson Fury realistic? Because he had previously talked about 50-50 if he was to fight Anthony Joshua, which is ridiculous. Yeah, that's either pricing yourself out, delusion, or greed as well, or a bit of all three. Because Tyson Fury is not even remotely as big a star in the UK as Anthony Joshua is. How on earth can this man act like he deserves 50-50? It's ridiculous. His commercial value is nowhere near as high as Anthony Joshua's commercial value. Joshua is the one who's all over the television with all the sponsorships. He's the one who's filled out stadiums. He's the one actually with a better resume than Tyson Fury. So how the hell can Tyson Fury demand 50-50? It's absurd. Completely absurd to be demanding 50-50. Anyone who tries to make a case that Fury deserves 50-50 needs to get their head examined. It's ridiculous. The ones bringing all the money to the table are Joshua and Hearn, not Fury. Joshua and Hearn are bringing all the money to the table for that potential fight. So if they're the ones bringing the money to the table, taking a financial risk, then of course they have to take way more than 50%. You know, at best 60-40 in Joshua's favor. You know, and I say at best for Tyson, from Tyson Fury's perspective. So I don't know what's going on there with Tyson Fury and the Joshua fight. Maybe he is just thinking back to that sparring session he had with Joshua where he admits he took a beating in that sparring session, and that was when Joshua was an inexperienced amateur. I don't know, but it's just curious that he's just so dismissive of the Joshua fight, but yet he's willing to take on Wilder. And as Tyson Fury said himself, he did take on Vladimir Klitschko without particularly great prep. He fought Joey Abel, he fought Christian Hammer, he fought Derek Chisora. None of those guys are anything like Vladimir Klitschko. But yet he still went, I mean, not just in terms of stylistically, but even in terms of levels. None of them are anywhere near Vladimir Klitschko's level in terms of his ability, boxing skill, and all that kind of stuff. So he jumped up several levels from the Chisoras and the Hammers of the world to fight Klitschko. And he'd be doing a similar thing, jumping up from the Pianettas of the world to fight Deontay Wilder. So we'll see whether he can do it. If he can, I mean, if he can go in there and fight Wilder and beat him, then you really have to say that Tyson Fury is an extraordinary fighter. Yeah, extraordinary. To be able to come through what he's come through and lose all that weight and do all that, that's incredible. And I think Frank Warren, I suspect, I don't know what's on Frank Warren's mind, but I suspect that he does believe in Tyson Fury, particularly after seeing him in training recently. Now, we know Frank Warren does want a big fight. We know he wants a big event. We know he wants something to finally rival what his nemesis, Eddie Hearn, has been doing over the past few years. We know he wants that. So, you know, I think he's looking for something a little bit more long-term, to be honest. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm misreading the situation. But I just get the feeling that Frank Warren does believe in Fury, genuinely. I think he does believe in him. But just because he believes in him, that don't mean Fury's going to deliver. Because Frank Warren has believed in many fighters over the years, and they've ended up disappointing him. So we'll see what happens. But this Fury-Wilder fight obviously intrigues me. And it intrigues me even more having seen how sharp Fury has looked on the pads. Let's see if he looks equally as sharp against Pianetta. I mean, he should, because Pianetta is so awful. Ideally, you'd like Fury to fight somebody else before facing Wilder. But if not, let's see what he can do. Let's see if he can replicate what he did against Klitschko. So, yeah, interesting times. Again, hopefully Tyson Fury gets back to his best. And if he does, obviously Frank Warren's a winner. He's back in the game, because Warren has been sidelined by the fact that Eddie Hearn is taking over British boxing. You know, so one thing I can say about Frank Warren, even though I've criticized him quite a lot, is he is a fighter. Frank Warren is a fierce man. He's ferocious. He's relentless. Okay, this man is driven by a different kind of fire, and he will not stop. That's how Frank Warren's career has been in general, both in terms of boxing promotion and in the courtroom. He is absolutely relentless. Even at his age now, he's still got the fire in his belly. So he is driven to try and regain his mantle as the top promoter in British boxing. So, I mean, throughout the 90s, he didn't actually have particularly stern competition. There was Barry Hearn, Eddie's father, but Barry Hearn was never on Frank Warren's level as a promoter. There was Frank Maloney as well, but he was nowhere. I mean, Frank Maloney had Lennox Lewis, but beyond that, Frank Maloney wasn't really doing that much. You know, he wasn't putting on the kind of cards that Frank Warren was putting on, you know, Frank Maloney. So there was a few guys floating around, but Warren was the man back then, and that's the position he wants to be in again. He wants to be the man once more. So we'll see if he can do it. Drop your comments in the comment section below. Let me know how you feel about everything I've talked about in this video. It's Hatman, I'm out.